Welcome to the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software Podcast, brought to you by ETOS, a single source of cutting-edge software and hardware solutions that make automotive embedded systems safe, smart, secure, and sustainable. Each episode, we'll be joined by ETOS and industry experts to discuss how electrification, automation, and connectivity are impacting the automotive industry. Now, sit back and enjoy the discussion.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software. My name is Zane Pelletier, and I'm your host for today. I'm a penetration tester and reverse engineer at ETOS, primarily servicing the North American region. And today, it's very exciting for me. We're going to talk about truck-to-truck cyberworms and a successful research project done at Colorado State University, focused on devices that allow some of these attacks to occur. Our guest today has presented at SCAR USA twice, most recently sharing the results of what I think most of us believe to be the first public wireless drive-by attack on a commercial vehicle. Jake Jepson recently graduated from Colorado State University with a master's degree in systems engineering, and he was also a graduate research assistant there studying cybersecurity in heavy vehicles, where he got the opportunity to work on this project. Jake, do you want to give a little bit of information on your background and what you've been up to now that you've graduated?
Sure. Yeah. I guess my background kind of began as it relates to cybersecurity early on. It was something I've always wanted to do. And then in college, I started getting into cars. I started working on my own car. And Dr. Daly, my advisor, he came by basically a cybersecurity club we have at CSU called HashJump, and kind of gave a presentation that essentially was, if you like cars and vehicles and you like cybersecurity, we have some research positions open. And I was like, I like those two things. And it all kind of started from there. So I was in his group for about the last 4 years. And then I just recently transitioned into industry, working at Red Balloon Security. And the official title is security researcher. It's very general. It's a small company, so we all do a little bit of everything right now. But it's fun. It's actually very similar to what I was doing at CSU in terms of just like research, which is something I really enjoy. And yeah.
Well, congratulations on your new role.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's dig into a little bit more on what exactly you did and why it's so important. So I'm going to start off by saying the first time I saw your presentation, I was pretty much locked in the whole time. There's this video, you can find it on YouTube pretty easily if you just search your name. But basically, you're in a Tesla and you're driving next to this heavy vehicle. It's a looks like a box truck. And it's, you guys are going the same speed. And then at a certain point, you launch the exploit wirelessly from the Tesla next to it. And the truck starts to slow down. You can even see the driver try to hit the gas pedal and it just will not accelerate, right? And you kind of pull ahead of it in the other vehicle. And just seeing something like that brought everything into reality for me. A lot of people talk about vehicle cybersecurity and they talk about the things that you can do. But the scariest thing to me is when you have such a large vehicle on the road and you have someone with the ability to control the way that it is behaving from a distance without actually having physical access. That's like the ultimate kind of bad dream for me, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about what enabled that, what the background was on the project? Did you come up with the idea? Was it something that your advisor had? And how did you develop it? And maybe even if you could give some background on just the technical specifics of what exactly you found with regards to, going through the process of researching and then exploiting the device that you did.
Sure, absolutely. So the device that I exploited is an ELD, which is an electronic logging device, and it is mandated federally for most commercial drivers. So those largely consist of large semi-truck drivers, and it's required for them for hours of service, like regulations. And hours of service are essentially just these regulations that were put in place a long time ago to help prevent drivers from overexerting themselves. And when they overexert themselves, then they get tired, and sleepy drivers cause accidents. So the FMCSA essentially mandated this technology because they were seeing, they believed that there was a lot of violations that were occurring with these hours of service logs that they had to do. And they used to be all paper based. And so they wanted to transition to using these electronic devices that would record all this information automatically, and therefore, in their mind, be a lot harder to fake. Whether or not that was achieved is, I think, I don't have enough data other than just speculation at this point. But what it did do is it mandated a lot of these devices to be attached to these vehicles, and a lot of these devices have wireless interfaces. There's some stuff in the mandate that actually required Bluetooth, I believe, as one of the transfer mechanisms. But overall, one of the things I've heard people ask is why do these devices have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on them? And overall, I think it's the same reason that we can find refrigerators with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on them.
Right.
Is that it just sells. It helps to sell the thing. It can be a little bit more convenient at times, but I think you were taking these sort of IoT type of devices, and there wasn't, one of the big issues was there's no requirements for security at the time. I have heard that at the time when it was originally released, it was released with a blank page at the top labeled security, and then it was like to do or something. Obviously, I can no longer
Wow.
find that, but that's what I've heard from people, so that it just was kind of just pushed aside and wasn't really considered. And so we kind of knew this at CSU. We knew that ELDs could have this potential. If you could compromise this device, you could then use it to send messages to the vehicle. But honestly, what spurred this whole thing was Dr. Daly just went online to Amazon and looked up ELD and just bought a bunch of popular ELDs.
Nice.
And then he just kind of tossed them to me and was like, let's look at these. Let's get the firmware off of them.
Right.
And that's what kind of started it. Any sort of penetration thing, you start with the reconnaissance phase and you see what you can get, and then you kind of go from there. And the first one that we bought was kind of this gold mine of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that not many people realize how easy it is to just go online to your favorite. Even Amazon, but something like Alibaba or some of the less mainstream, at least here in the North American region, sites have a lot of cheap devices. And in my mind, cheap IoT usually equals they didn't do any security, because that's probably the most expensive part of the whole process, right? The thing that some people consider to be non-essential, right? Yeah, so let's talk about for somebody who's never seen an ELD before. We know that there's some wireless interfaces on here. I hear that Bluetooth is mandated. There's the ability to connect to it wirelessly, essentially. What other kind of interfaces are there? This is like a handheld device, essentially, right? That's in the cabin of the vehicle, and then I assume it plugs in to the actual the network on the truck at some point in time to collect the data that you were describing earlier. Can you kind of go through what exactly it's connected to usually?
Yeah. So these devices, they come in all shapes and sizes, and they didn't just appear out of nowhere. Large companies have been using, large fleet companies have been using ELDs for a long time. They are, and maybe they didn't call them ELDs. You could also call them telematics. They just kind of got the name ELD when they started becoming mandated. But they come in all shapes and sizes. Everything from a unit installed by a professional technician that the driver may never know it's even there. It collects all the data, and they hand over the logs all behind the scenes to, well, the device we looked at was a little handheld device, but I've been told that you can even pick these up at truck stops. I personally haven't found one yet, but I don't visit a lot of truck stops, so I don't I don't have a whole wide range. But I've been told that there are ELD vending machines that you can just put in some money and you get out an ELD, and that way you can always be compliant with it. But because they come in all of these shapes and sizes, the one that we were kind of looking at, this IO6 logger, is they were trying to pack it as much as they could into just a tiny little device. And it's pretty impressive what they put in there. And so it doesn't have any other interfaces on it other than your wireless interfaces, which were discussed, GPS, and then the diagnostics connector. So in cars, I guess what I always say is in cars you have your OBD2 port, which a lot of people are familiar with because in a lot of states they have emissions testing and they have to plug into the OBD2 port. But on trucks it's a circular Deutsch 9-pin port, and that's what this device is connected to. So it doesn't have any other like physical plug-in interfaces other than that, and it's fairly easy to use. You just plug it in, you download whatever companion app from whichever company you bought it from, you pair it, and then you're good to go. I think all that is actually really important. It was something I was thinking about as I was doing this, because I think that security researchers tend to just look at how much the company might have missed rather than how hard the problem is to solve. And in this case, the problem that the company had to solve was you're selling a device to customers that there were many of them that didn't want the device. They opposed the ELD mandate. There were truckers that went up to Washington and parked their vehicles outside in protest. And so if you're selling a device to people that don't want them, you want to make it as easy as possible to use the device. Also because, I'm assuming the average truck driver is maybe not super great with electronics. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily worse than anyone else. It's just that you can expect that every truck driver is going to be a whiz and know how to do X, Y, and Z. So you want to make it easy. And security and ease of use often don't go hand in hand. And I think that is important to keep in mind as we kind of explain the vulnerabilities, because some of them might seem like obvious and it's like, how did you miss that sort of thing? But at the same time, this device needs to be just super easy to use.
Yeah, and so with possibly the cost aspect there too, that was an easy thing I think for them to cut during the design process and maybe even implementation, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's also something that gets overlooked for a lot of people that are doing penetration testing and other like red team assessments is, usually a lot of people I've heard will go and just run some scans and say, okay, you're good, But I think with this specifically, you had a very unique exploitation path that you wanted to pursue. And you essentially leveraged what you could to get to that exploitable outcome. And that ended up, uncovering a lot of things, but also illustrating the severity of what exactly you were able to find. I mean, there were really large real world consequences I think that came out of that. So I guess, is there anything, it sounds like to a certain extent, you already kind of knew what you were going to find, right? Is there anything that really surprised you with regards to how easy it was to perform any one part of that exploit, or how badly this thing was locked down? I mean, yeah, anything like that you kind of have a takeaway, where maybe it's something that you try every time you get your hands on a new device now?
Overall, I wasn't completely surprised by maybe some of the vulnerabilities, but there was a couple things that I guess stood out to me over time, and that was one of the first ones that stood out to me was when I was first looking at this device, and I'm going through, I'm reading the manual, just trying to get a sense of what this device is. I was, up until that point, I'd heard of ELDs, but I'd never really worked with an ELD. And so I was just trying to figure out, like, how do you normally use this device? And one of the first things that caught my attention was that it was broadcasting this Wi-Fi network, this password-protected Wi-Fi network, that it had no mention of in the manual. And just as like a security researcher, this kind of made me surprised, made me a little interested about this device, because if you think about what the developers were doing, like, why would you spend the time to develop the wireless interface if you weren't going to use this? So immediately I start thinking that maybe this is something that was left in that is used for other purposes like debugging, testing, things like that maybe shouldn't have been left in. So that was kind of like the first surprise that got me really interested about the device and told me something might be up with it as well. I guess the other surprise was less so about maybe a specific vulnerability, but more so like the ELD market in general. There's a lot of reselling that goes on in the market, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just some really weird things. Like I remember finding one reseller of this particular device that they were putting up website after website after website of like these just like random ELD companies that all sold like the exact same products. It would be an
Oh,
ELD,
wow.
yeah, it would be an ELD, this two-way facing like dash cam, these brake lights that essentially had a GPS in them so that you could like track the trailer if the trailer got stolen. So like asset trackers, I think the name for it. And when I was looking at their mobile apps were all essentially identical, but then they would have basically these arrays of themes for all the
Mm,
different companies. So if you downloaded this app, it was essentially exactly the same as the other one, except it would go with, this URL for backend and these themes and images, and which is all a little shady. Like
right.
it's definitely not a normal thing you see for a company to be propping up all of these other companies and websites, and it really just kind of took me by surprise for the market. Yeah, I mean those that I was just yeah, I definitely spent some time digging into that stuff and just seeing what was up with it. I mean I ended up finding some of their websites for companies that they hadn't fully gotten up and running. Like one they had just put up the Nginx instance for.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but they hadn't actually like put all the theming in for the website
It's
yet.
just kind of sitting there. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Huh.
so that was pretty interesting. And then I guess the third surprise, and this one just as I was looking at it, kind of came to me was the thought that I could potentially make the vulnerabilities wormable. As I was like kind of reverse engineering it, I just one day I was thinking about. I think the way I kind of got to it was we were initially thinking about like Wi-Fi and range and like how far could you exploit this from, and because trucks are big metal things and they can often interfere with Wi-Fi.
Right. Yeah.
It's actually something we have to account for at like the cyber events we put on. We have to put up multiple access points all the way around because the trucks do a really good job of blocking out Wi-Fi signal. So one of the first questions I wanted to answer when looking into this was, even if we find something, is it realistically exploitable? Or was there the thought of not putting any security into it because you can't really access it from outside the cab? And as we were kind of doing these experiments and found out that they do actually have pretty good range outside of the cab, I remember just thinking about that it's a ESP32 and they have the ability to both broadcast a Wi-Fi access point, but then in addition they can act as a client. And if you can do both at the same time, then you should be able to make it into a worm where it can spread from one device to another.
Yeah. Maybe I probably should have brought that up sooner. I don't know if everyone listening is necessarily knows the terminology of what exactly a worm is, but I think you described it very well just now. It's basically just an infection that you can cause exploiting a vulnerability that will then spread from device to device. And it kind of sounds like this ecosystem, like you were saying earlier, is already set up for something like that because you have a whole bunch of different devices that aren't actually different. They're essentially the same hardware. They're leveraging all the same things, the same types of backends, right? But are being sold under, it doesn't even sound like different. Well, maybe it's different brands, but it's not like the same companies rebranding over and over again. It's like they're standing up a whole bunch of shell companies almost that are doing the same thing. They're just kind of catering to a different market, maybe. So yeah, that is very strange. So I guess when we think about, if this thing can spread from one device to another device, and you have these devices in the trucks, like you're saying, I also remember you were telling me at one point that you essentially were sitting at I think it was a truck stop. You showed me a picture. You had your laptop open, and you're basically just scanning for, I think it was one specific type of ELD, right? It was the one that you were looking at to try to see how many were just kind of sitting there and how many could potentially be vulnerable. And so that was a very interesting concept to me where, even though the trucks might not be able to infect each other just by, being on the road with each other, they might be too far away. They do all usually congregate in the same location at the same times. You can almost think about it like a proximity watering hole attack, where you could have something spread when all of the trucks are parked close to each other in this area where they typically are, on a daily basis almost. So yeah, I don't know if you've given any more thought to that, and if that's a huge issue, and if also, you hadn't caught this, if this was something that could realistically have been out there in the wild, because it seems like it was just a matter of time before somebody found this, you know.
Yeah, so we started thinking about, like, once we had uncovered that we could, connect to it and reflash the firmware on the device with modified malicious firmware. Once we had that, and we had confirmed that, okay, we can do it from outside the vehicle. Then it became, what would the damage look like? Like, how is this something that very few people are using, or is this something that is much larger? Because I knew that there was a bunch of resellers of it, and getting in contact with all the resellers wouldn't be easy. But if it was, maybe a new device, new on the market, maybe there was still plenty of time before a lot of people used it. So we just wanted to get an idea. And of course, I started looking at the resellers' websites, and I was seeing some crazy numbers. I mean, some were saying they had like 80,000 customers, which might be true, but it's hard to take maybe all those numbers to know if they're true or not, because obviously the company wants to advertise and say that they're doing great, and so that number could be inflated a little bit, especially from some of the shadier resellers. It was kind of hard to know. And so I kind of drew from a couple of statistics. First, we have the resellers' websites, and they were saying, I think at one point, if you took them all at face value, the number ended up being like over 1 million of these devices out there.
Wow.
And I was like, that seems a little high. But then if we look at the manufacturer's website, IO6, they actually showed at the time how many they had in back order, and they had, or not back order, but like stocked. And I remember seeing like they had close to 20,000 available for purchase, which you don't order 20,000 of anything unless you think that you can sell the thing. So obviously it's popular. And these devices were very popular on Amazon for good reason, right? They have all the features. They support all the different companies that are working with them can have all these great advanced like diagnostics and logistics stuff with them. And so then the next question was, well, if there seems like there's a lot, how hard would it be to actually find one of these devices out in the wild? And so that picture that you're referring to is actually Dr. Daly had. I think they drove the CSU truck to a truck stop, potentially to get some gas, and he had just driven there as well with his car and popped open his laptop and was essentially just scanning and looking for the Wi-Fi ID, because these devices all had a very unique and identifiable Wi-Fi ID. So it was pretty easy to know once one came into range. And then one of the vulnerabilities was this hard-coded default password, which wouldn't have been such a big vulnerability. Like, it's not uncommon for devices to have a hard-coded default password. Like, a lot of devices have it. The issue was that resellers weren't changing them. I think we ended up, and I don't remember the name of the company, but I think we ended up finding like one reseller that like consistently changed that password. But like all the rest were just going with the defaults because it was easy. And so the default itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just, the bad thing was that it wasn't being changed. And I guess maybe I should correct that statement and say a better way would have been to have defaults with entropy, because then you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the resellers changing them so much. So there's, I guess you can throw the blame at different parties, but at the end of the day, what we'd found is we went out to these truck stops, and yeah, we could just go to a truck stop, and likely within a day, sitting there and scanning, we could see one or more of these devices come through the truck stop at some point. And so that kind of told us that this is pretty realistic. Like, if we can really easily just go out and find these devices, then maybe these numbers that the resellers are talking about are not so far off. And I actually finally got the answer that I had been looking for way back then, just recently with the Nista safety recall of the device. They listed the number of units affected as 140,000. So that ended up being the answer that we were kind of looking for at the time, which sounds about correct based off of how much of the market we think that they probably had.
Wow. Yeah, that's still a lot of devices.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, over 100K. Yeah, that's I would say
It's
that that's, substantial.
yeah, and it's kind of interesting to think about. A lot of people think the job of a truck driver is a very lonely job, and that might be true, but their vehicles if you think of vehicles as being social, they are definitely way more social than like your average standard vehicle. They are near other vehicles and see and meet and go by other vehicles way more often than your typical vehicle, I would say. Once you start driving along the routes that a lot of truckers take, I mean, they have entire stores and chains that are specifically for truck drivers. It's a giant industry, and so their parking lots are constantly filled with trucks. And that kind of got us thinking, okay, so we know it's realistic that it can spread. We know that there's a decent amount out there. What is the most effective way to spread? Which, as we were as we were thinking about this, because we were discussing one day just these ideas, and it was kind of odd because for the first time, it was like, if we want to get a good sense of how dangerous this is, we truly have to think like an attacker. Like, how would we do the most amount of damage to people to actually get an idea of what it could be? And so this is where we started kind of going through the scenarios of, well, we know we can spread from nearby a truck. So that already answers the question. If you have a couple of trucks parked next to each other in a parking lot, could it spread? Answer is yes. The next one was that we wanted to know the answer to was, can we spread while they're driving? And we kind of knew that it should be possible. Like, trucks can take a while to pass each other on the road sometimes. And that's typically because they're both being speed limited, but their speedometers aren't at the same number. And so one might be going 1 or 2 miles per hour over and doesn't want to keep braking behind the other one, so they want to pass them, but then it takes forever for them to pass. So in cases like that, could you spread? And that was kind of the jumpstart, the idea for doing the drive-by attack, where we went out to the airfield. And so in that one, we kind of tried to set it up. Obviously, we have a pretty small airfield, so we couldn't go the 60 miles per hour that you can go on a highway. But we didn't want to test on a highway. We wanted to be safe, do it at an airfield.
Definitely.
Yeah. And like, one of the things throughout this whole thing that we were thinking about, there's a big backlash in the industry after the Jeep attack. And some of the things that caused this backlash was not being maybe respectful to the manufacturer. So like, one of the things I've always tried to include in all of my presentations was that IO6 responded way better than many of the other cases we've seen out there. They didn't threaten to sue us. They told us at least they fixed the problem, and so far it seems like they did. They had good communication with us. It seemed all pretty open, and so overall that was great. The other issue we wanted to fix and wanted to make, or other mistake we wanted to ensure that we didn't make, was, I think it ticked off a lot of people in the Jeep stuff when they did the Jeep attack on a live roadway. Because if you're going to tell people about how this attack could be dangerous, you likely don't want to actually endanger other people just to prove that point.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
That sort of becomes like that vigilante style thing where it's like, in order to show this thing, I have to take these extreme measures. So we were like, we have access to the airfield. Let's make sure that we do it in a safe area so that, yes, we can show how dangerous it could be, but we don't actually want to endanger the lives of others on the road.
Right. In the end, you're just simulating it. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You
Yeah.
want it to be as realistic as possible. But yeah, I mean, that's should be common sense, right? If you're going to be doing research like that, that you should take some precautions when you're doing something like that. But not everybody follows that. You brought up a good point though with the disclosure process. So it sounds like the vendor, they worked with you. It sounds like a kind of a dream scenario, in my opinion, because I've also worked with folks going through the process of like doing vulnerability disclosure for like a CVE, and usually, the company's either non-responsive, or like you said, they try to sue you, or they try to say, hey, like, why are you bringing this up? We don't want to deal with this, right? I guess is there anything from going through that you're going to take with you? Is there anything that maybe some piece of knowledge you can impart to someone who's going through a similar process of finding something that they've researched and they're trying to disclose it, and they just aren't getting very much traction with the vendor that they're reporting it to?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we did was the first thing we did was we made a proof of concept. And this can be controversial to a lot of people outside of the realm of security, because if we go back to the thing I was just saying about how you don't want to like endanger the lives of others while you're trying to show how it could be used to endanger the lives of others type of thing, they wonder why make a proof of concept. And I think that first one is just companies don't want to. There's a lot of great sayings I've heard that maybe can't be shared in the podcast, but companies don't want to be showed that like their product has a lot of flaws
Right.
in it, and they're gonna downplay it. I mean, I think that's just like the nature of, if you spend a whole ton of time building a product that you're really proud of, you're not maybe going to be the most receptive right away to being shown these flaws. And if you're not a security researcher, you're not necessarily thinking in the worst case. You're not thinking, how could this, in the worst case scenario, be used? And this is where the proof of concept is really important. I had actually done a previous vulnerability disclosure where I showed that an attacker could basically attack the software thing and manipulate these logs coming out of the vehicle, but I hadn't made a proof of concept. We just went and reported it. And the answer that we got back was that the company just didn't really care about it. Like they didn't take it seriously. And I think that's valid why companies don't do that, but I think it just is a great argument for why proof of concepts are important. So went ahead and we built the proof of concept. Then we go ahead and we want to actually disclose this. I'd never done a disclosure of this size before, and one of the things we were worried about and didn't quite know how to handle was, okay, we know the manufacturer, but there's also a lot of these resellers. And we didn't like, I don't have the ability to communicate with the manufacturer and then plus a ton of other resellers and try to coordinate that disclosure. And at the same time, I guess I don't, I don't know for sure if the manufacturer is going to reach out to all of the resellers and um, make sure that they update this. I mean, I don't know if, I guess one of the things to know is that you could just go and buy these devices. So it's very possible that there's resellers reselling these devices without IO6 knowing. And then in that case, it's they would have no like communication path with that company. So this is where we wanted to reach out to a government agency, specifically go to one of the like reporting centers where, from what we understood, their goal was to help with this coordinated disclosure process. It worked out. We had some FBI agents that were giving a talk at
Cool.
CSU around right when we were deciding how to go about this. And so we just asked them, we're like, we found some vulnerabilities that could be pretty serious. We don't know the full scope. We don't have all the information, but there could be a lot of companies involved. Where should we go? And so they pointed us towards CISA, which is the, let's see if I can remember this acronym, Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency. And they point us towards CISA. CISA has a specific place for reporting OT vulnerabilities. There's I think Idaho National Labs might be the center for where you report. We end up using their website, so I kind of forget who was on the other side. But we essentially go there. You fill out very long form. You give definition, like all the definitions of like the vulnerabilities that you're doing, and then you show proof of concepts as well if you have them, and you upload all that. They review the stuff, and then they kind of help you through the disclosure process. I was not the most happy with how CISA responded. They were not very motivated at first, which could be, there's plenty of really good explanations for this, like lack of funding and things like that. But just from my experience with them, it was not the best. We were hoping that they would, take the lead, take charge, and maybe do more than just reach out to IO6. We were hoping they might reach out to FMCSA and say, hey, this is a great example of why there should be security requirements in your mandate. Like, you shouldn't mandate this technology if you're not going to include security requirements in there. Right. Or NHTSA and say, hey, there's a bunch of these potentially vulnerable devices on the road. Let's make more people aware of this. Because apart from the resellers and everything, at the end of the day, you have to get truck drivers to update these devices. Right, and if they are not listening to cybersecurity news, they're not going to know about it. Right. And I wouldn't expect them to just be listening to that sort of stuff necessarily. And then apart from that was the resellers. We're hoping that we gave them lists of all the resellers that we could find, and we were hoping that they would help out with contacting those resellers. Unfortunately, the only thing to this day that we know that they did was just contact IO6 about it, which was a little frustrating because we could have done that ourselves. We're kind of hoping for more of this like coordinated effort. Like the NHTSA recall just came out recently. It took, I guess, over a full year for, if I'm getting my dates right around a year for that to occur.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so fact, it's like
that's pretty early in my mind for a government agency, right?
Yeah, I guess so. We were just kind of hoping that if the right people were contacted early on, this could get solved a lot faster,
right?
As well.
Yeah, you'd hope for some advocacy there, with someone like that. Yep, definitely.
So it was nice that, they had a process. There's a place you can go, so you can record everything. You can have a nice log of stuff. They use this Vince reporting software. And so that was all great, but yeah, definitely a little disappointed. I was hoping more for a coordinated approach, and that wasn't really what we got.
Definitely. Yeah. I think in these things, persistency is key. And that's something that I think really won out, especially with something like this, being able to continue to follow up with it and eventually get the result that is going to, better everyone's lives, hopefully.
Yeah, I guess one of the things we made sure to do along those lines was, this is something I'd pushed for along with the proof of concept, was that we would make it clear to anyone that we were disclosing this to that after we had a couple dates, but they were all more than 3 months away, that we would be disclosing this at academic conferences. And the reason I wanted to make sure that was important is I had seen, even Google's like Project Zero, they expose these vulnerabilities publicly, but they make sure to give these companies a lot of notice ahead of time, with the goal that everything is patched by the time that they expose the vulnerabilities. Like that's kind of the goal. Because I had heard time and time again that if you don't set this deadline of when you're going to expose it publicly, then companies, they're just going to push it by the wayside. They're kind of going to drag you along. They're not going to spend the money and spend the time to fix it unless there's a clear deadline that they have to meet. And so one of the interesting things was CISA's deadline that they would publish this was 45 days, which was much faster than what we had initially planned on. The 45 days came and went, and 46 and 47, 48 and 49, and it took them, they essentially waited until our 3-month, a little over 3-month deadline to actually go ahead and publish the vulnerability publicly.
Okay.
Which was, we didn't really get much of an explanation about that. The explanation they kind of gave was that IO6 was working on it, But apart from that, we didn't really get an explanation as to why. And I feel that if we hadn't set those deadlines, that we had these upcoming academic conferences that we're academic researchers. Like, we do security research, we publish the results. Like, that's what we do. And if we hadn't set those deadlines, I'm not sure when CISA would have gotten around to publishing that vulnerability, which goes back to, I'm not sure then when IO6 would have gotten around to fixing the vulnerability. So having those deadlines, having the proof of concept is all very needed, in my opinion.
Certainly, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jake. I really appreciate you talking with me today about this. This has been a really good conversation. Honestly, talking to someone who's done a wireless drive-by attack on a heavy vehicle is really cool. It's a really cool project that you were able to do. I think a really important disclosure for you to make that had some pretty big real-world consequences. So, really appreciate you talking with me today about this. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything on this that you'd like to share?
I mean, the closing kind of remarks that I would give at the presentations I did is, if there was one party or group to point to that might have been responsible for this, is the fact that we have these government mandated devices and they didn't mandate security to be required in them. That, I think, is the key issue here. And that was the thing that we were pushing for this whole time to be changed. And the reason why is, sure, you can fix this one device, but that is likely not the only device with exploitable vulnerabilities that could potentially be turned into a worm. And, these occurred because you can create a device and then you can go to FMCSA's website and you just check a box that says, I certify that this device meets all the requirements. But no one's checking you. There weren't any requirements for security in there. And I think that was ultimately the failure that kind of led to this.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, thank you everyone for listening. This concludes our episode for today. Please check back again soon for a new one, and take care.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software podcast. Please leave a comment or review with your feedback or what you'd like to hear in future episodes. To learn more about automotive embedded systems and ETAS's capabilities, visit our website at ETAS. That's ETAS.com.